Bird flu is spreading fast. Could it jump to humans? A new wave of Mpox infections may be coming. Drug-resistant tuberculosis is on the rise in the US. Measles outbreaks are hitting multiple states. Deadly viruses like Marburg are spreading overseas. Could travel restrictions and medical shortages follow? These outbreaks aren't just health stories. They could impact supply chains, travel, and daily life. Could new restrictions be on the horizon? Are we looking at more medical shortages? What do these developments mean for preppers? Welcome to Preppers News and global events with a prepper's perspective. I use a computer-generated voice because my own is hard to understand due to an injury. Today, we're looking at the latest disease outbreaks that preppers need to watch. We'll break down which ones are spreading, what risks they pose, and how they could impact daily life, supply chains, and freedom of movement. Bird flu, or H5N1, continues to spread in the US, primarily among poultry and wild birds. The virus has now been detected in a growing number of mammals, raising concerns that it could mutate to spread more easily among humans. While human cases are still rare, past pandemics have shown that flu viruses can evolve quickly. So far, the biggest impact has been on the food supply. Large-scale poultry culls have driven up egg and chicken prices before, and if the outbreak worsens, costs could rise again. The CDC is monitoring the situation, but the real question is, how long before governments start pushing for stricter measures? Meanwhile, measles outbreaks are hitting multiple states. Cases are rising in areas with lower vaccination rates, and because measles is one of the most contagious diseases in the world, it spreads fast once introduced to a community. Schools and public health agencies are already responding with quarantine recommendations in some areas. If the outbreaks continue, localized lockdowns or school closures could follow. While measles isn't a new threat, its resurgence is another reminder of how fast a small outbreak can turn into a nationwide problem. Health officials are warning about a potential resurgence of Mpox, the disease formerly known as monkeypox. While the last outbreak faded from headlines, cases never fully disappeared, and recent reports suggest a new wave is beginning. Some of these cases involve more severe symptoms, raising concerns about whether the virus is mutating. Mpox spreads through close contact, and past outbreaks showed how quickly it can move through communities. While it hasn't reached pandemic levels, the possibility of a wider outbreak could lead to renewed public health measures. If infection numbers spike, we could see more vaccination pushes, travel advisories, or even quarantine recommendations in certain areas. Another major concern is drug-resistant tuberculosis. TB never really went away, but funding cuts to global health programs have slowed efforts to contain it. As a result, drug-resistant strains are spreading faster. The US has already seen an increase in cases, with a particularly concerning cluster in Kansas that surpassed the state's annual average in just a few months. Drug-resistant TB is much harder to treat, requiring longer and more expensive courses of medication. If this trend continues, hospitals and healthcare systems could struggle to contain it, leading to stricter public health policies. TB spreads through the air, meaning crowded places like public transit, workplaces, and schools could become high-risk areas if more cases emerge. If outbreaks worsen, movement restrictions or mandatory testing could become a possibility. Marburg Virus, a deadly hemorrhagic fever similar to Ebola, has been causing concern after new outbreaks were reported in Africa. The virus has an extremely high fatality rate, killing anywhere from 24% to 88% of those infected, depending on medical access. Symptoms include severe fever, internal bleeding, vomiting, and organ failure. So far, Marburg outbreaks have been contained to Africa, but with international travel, there's always a risk of it reaching other parts of the world. While past cases in the US have been rare, a single infected traveler could change that. If Marburg were to spread, expect strict government measures, including isolation protocols, flight restrictions, and possibly even lockdowns in affected areas. Meanwhile, dengue fever is surging across South and Central America, with cases at record highs. The disease is spread by mosquitoes, and rising temperatures are making outbreaks worse. Dengue is sometimes called breakbone fever because of the severe muscle and joint pain it causes. Other symptoms include high fever, intense headaches, and in severe cases, internal bleeding. While it's not typically fatal, some cases progress to a life-threatening stage known as dengue hemorrhagic fever. With international travel and warming climates, the U.S. is already seeing more locally transmitted dengue cases, especially in southern states like Florida and Texas. If the outbreak worsens, we could see an increase in government mosquito control programs, pesticide spraying, or even travel advisories in affected regions. These outbreaks could pose real health risks, especially for those with weakened immune systems, chronic conditions, or limited access to medical care. Drug-resistant tuberculosis spreads through the air, making it a threat in crowded areas like public transportation, workplaces, and schools. Measles, one of the most contagious diseases, can spread rapidly in any community. And with the potential resurgence of Mpox, along with the increasing risk of mosquito-borne diseases like dengue, preppers should take these health threats seriously. That said, the goal here isn't to cause panic. It's to highlight areas where preparedness matters. Understanding these risks allows preppers to make informed decisions rather than reacting to shortages or restrictions when it's too late. Beyond personal health concerns, these outbreaks have the potential to disrupt supply chains and limit access to critical resources. We've already seen how bird flu outbreaks drive up the price of poultry and eggs. If culls continue, or if the virus spreads to humans, food prices could rise again. The same goes for medical supplies. Drug-resistant TB is already making treatment more expensive and harder to obtain. If more cases spread, expect even longer delays for antibiotics and other essential medications. During past health crises, protective equipment like masks and gloves disappeared from shelves overnight. The same could happen again if new disease outbreaks cause a rush for supplies. Over-the-counter medications, fever reducers, and even certain prescription drugs could become harder to find as demand increases. And it's not just medicine. Supply chain disruptions could hit everything from food imports to everyday essentials. If outbreaks in key regions slow down manufacturing or shipping, expect delays on goods coming into the U.S. During past disease outbreaks, we've seen how quickly governments can impose travel restrictions, quarantine measures, and other policies that impact daily life. If any of these current outbreaks escalate, we could see similar responses, some of which might happen with little warning. Drug-resistant tuberculosis could lead to increased screening at airports and border crossings, especially if cases rise in major cities. Travelers might face mandatory testing or quarantine requirements if they show symptoms or have been in high-risk areas. We've already seen policies like these used in past outbreaks, and if drug-resistant TB continues to spread, they could return. Mpox and measles outbreaks may also lead to restrictions, particularly for schools, workplaces, and public events. Some areas are already implementing quarantine recommendations for measles exposure. If numbers continue to rise, more workplaces and public spaces could require proof of immunity or recent vaccination. Marburg virus and dengue fever, while not widespread in the U.S. yet, could impact travel. If cases are detected in returning travelers, it could trigger stricter border controls or health screenings for flights from affected regions. In the case of Marburg, even a small outbreak in the U.S. would likely lead to strict containment measures due to its high fatality rate. As we've seen before, government responses often vary from state to state. Some areas may impose strict measures, while others take a more hands-off approach. Preppers should stay informed about local policies and be ready to adapt. Disease outbreaks aren't always predictable, but patterns in past health crises can give us an idea of what to expect. Right now, the key things to watch are whether these outbreaks continue to spread, how governments respond, and how they impact everyday life. Bird flu could remain just an issue for poultry farms, or it could jump to humans, triggering a major response. Drug-resistant TB is already spreading, but will it reach a tipping point where it becomes a larger public health emergency? Measles and Mpox cases are climbing, and we'll see whether containment efforts slow them down or if they become widespread enough to cause new restrictions. On the supply chain side, rising food costs and medication shortages are already concerns. If these outbreaks continue, we may see further price increases and limited availability for certain goods. Preppers should keep an eye on how these events develop and be aware of any changes in travel rules, public health mandates, or medical supply shortages. While no one can predict exactly what will happen next, staying informed is the first step to being prepared. Let me know in the comments, Are you making any adjustments to your preps based on these disease outbreaks? If you found this update helpful, consider subscribing for more news with a prepper's perspective. Thanks for watching Preppers News. Stay informed, stay prepared, and I'll see you next time.